Hi guys, and welcome to Boring History Secrets channel. Tonight, we step quietly into a place where warmth is not promised, where stone holds the memory of winter long after the sun has gone. You arrive at a medieval monastery just as the last light slips behind bare hills. The air tightens around your face. Your breath shows itself without asking permission. Somewhere nearby, a bell has just finished ringing, its echo thinning into the cold. This is not the kind of cold that feels dramatic. It is patient. It settles in early, like it plans to stay. You probably will not survive this. At least not comfortably. And that is kind of the point. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And as you settle in, tell me where you are listening from and what time it is there. Now, dim the lights, and let yourself step forward with me. You stand just inside the outer wall, your boots pressing against stone that already feels colder than the air. The monastery does not greet you. It does not rush to make space. It simply exists, heavy and unmoving. Medieval monks did not choose these places because they were cozy. One well-established historical fact is that many monastic orders deliberately located their communities in remote, exposed areas, hills, marshlands, windswept valleys, places where comfort did not come easily. Cold was part of the landscape, not an accident. As dusk deepens, the temperature drops fast. Stone does that. It releases heat reluctantly and absorbs cold eagerly. You feel it through your soles, through your palms when you touch the wall for balance. The smell here is faint but distinct. Damp stone, old lime mortar, a trace of smoke that never quite warms anything. There is no central heating, obviously, and no illusion that there will be. The monks knew this before you did. They planned their lives around it. You follow a narrow passage inward. The sound of your steps echoes softly, then fades. The building seems to swallow noise. Silence here is not empty. It is layered. Wind presses against shutters somewhere above. A distant cough travels down a corridor and disappears. These are the nighttime sounds you will live with. There is a persistent modern myth that medieval monasteries were miserable prisons of cold and suffering. The reality is quieter and more complex. The cold was real. Yes, but it was not chaotic. It was expected, managed, and in some ways respected. Here is a curious detail that often surprises people. Many monks slept fully clothed, even indoors, well into the early modern period, not because they were lazy or fearful, but because undressing in winter stone buildings meant losing precious body heat that might not return easily. Some rules even discouraged excessive comfort at night, framing warmth as something earned through discipline. Historians still debate whether these practices were primarily spiritual or simply practical adaptations dressed up as theology. You pause near a small courtyard. The sky above has turned deep blue, almost black. Stars appear sharper in cold air, and you notice them more clearly here than you would in a town. The monastery is not fighting the night. It is yielding to it. That choice shapes how sleep will work later. There is no frantic attempt to push cold away with fire or insulation. Instead, there is acceptance, preparation, and routine. A monk passes you quietly. His sandals scrape lightly against the floor. Wool layers hang heavy from his frame. Wool was the miracle fabric of the medieval world, retaining warmth even when damp, insulating without trapping moisture too badly. This is not a luxury. It is survival technology. The cut of his clothing is simple, but the thickness matters. Clothing, more than architecture, is what keeps people alive here. You notice how the light changes as you move deeper inside. Candles burn low and carefully. Fire is treated with suspicion. A quirky but very real detail from monastic records is how often fires were blamed for catastrophic losses. Entire monasteries burned because someone grew careless. As a result, Warmth from flame was limited and controlled. Cold was safer than fire. That calculation shaped everything about sleeping arrangements. Your fingers begin to ache slightly, not painfully, just enough to remind you they exist. This is information, not drama. Medieval monks would have recognized this sensation immediately. Cold was a language the body spoke fluently back then. Tingling meant move. Stiffness meant adjust posture. Numbness meant danger was approaching. Later generations, cushioned by constant warmth, lost some of that sensitivity. You are led toward the dormitory area, though tonight you will imagine a single cell, because many orders eventually moved away from shared sleeping spaces. Even now, as you walk, the temperature inside is barely different from outside. Stone walls buffer wind. Not cold. This is another mainstream historical reality that often gets simplified. Stone keeps buildings standing, not warm. Anyone who has stepped into an unheated church in winter knows this instantly. There is an odd calm that comes with realizing no rescue is coming. No extra blankets will appear. No hidden hearth will suddenly glow. The monastery has already decided how cold tonight will be, and you are simply entering into that decision. Some scholars suggest that this environment reshaped monks' mental relationship with sleep itself. Rest was not indulgence. It was maintenance. Something done carefully, efficiently, without expectation of comfort. You reach a doorway. Inside, the air feels stiller, but not warmer. The stone has absorbed the day and now gives nothing back. You imagine lying here later, listening to your own breathing, feeling the slow pull of heat from your body into the walls. It sounds bleak when described plainly, but lived slowly, it becomes almost meditative. Remember this first impression. The cold after sunset. The way it does not attack but waits. Everything that follows grows out of this moment. The rules, the clothing, the beds, the prayers in the dark. They all exist because of this quiet, creeping cold that settles in as night arrives. You take one last breath of the corridor air, sharp and clean, and step fully inside the life that has learned how to sleep without heat. The cold does not surprise anyone here, and neither do the rules that shape how you live inside it. As you settle into the rhythm of the monastery, you begin to notice that comfort is not something openly discussed. It is not forbidden exactly, but it is never centered. The rule that governs this place does not shout its demands. It murmurs them, calmly, persistently, until they become part of how you move, eat, work, and eventually sleep. One widely accepted historical fact is that most medieval monasteries followed detailed written rules, the most famous being the Rule of Saint Benedict. These rules covered everything from prayer schedules to meal portions to sleeping arrangements. What stands out is not cruelty, but restraint. The expectation was not to suffer dramatically, but to avoid excess. Warmth, like food or sleep, was meant to be sufficient, not indulgent. You feel this philosophy as soon as you observe how little effort is spent trying to improve the temperature of individual spaces. There is no scrambling for extra blankets, no late-night adjustments to make things nicer. The monks accept the conditions and structure their bodies around them. This is a mental shift that feels foreign at first. Modern life trains you to eliminate discomfort immediately. Here, discomfort is managed, not erased. A monk pauses near you, adjusting his cloak before heading toward evening prayers. The fabric is thick, worn smooth by years of use. Clothing here is standardized, but not identical. Heavier layers are allowed in winter, a small concession written into many monastic rules. This detail often gets overlooked, but it matters. The monks were not reckless with their health. They were disciplined, not foolish. There is a persistent idea that monks embraced cold as punishment. That makes for dramatic storytelling. But the reality is subtler. The rules emphasize moderation. Cold was tolerated because it was unavoidable, not because it was inherently holy. Historians still argue whether later interpretations exaggerated early ascetic intentions, turning practical endurance into symbolic suffering. As night approaches fully, you notice how the schedule tightens. Bells regulate movement. Meals end early. The monastery prepares for darkness in an orderly way. This matters because sleep here is not a private negotiation between you and your mattress. It is a communal rhythm. Everyone goes to rest at roughly the same time, and everyone wakes at the same time, regardless of how cold the night becomes. There is a quirky detail tucked into some monastic writings that feels almost modern. Complaints, quiet ones, carefully worded, about drafts and icy floors. They are not dramatic protests, but they reveal awareness. The monks knew the cold was hard. They simply chose to frame it as part of the discipline they had agreed to follow. This choice changes how the cold feels. It becomes predictable, even familiar. You walk slowly now, conserving warmth without thinking about it consciously. Your shoulders hunch slightly. Your arms stay close to your body. These small movements mirror what generations before you learned through experience. The rules do not spell out how to walk when cold, but life here teaches it quickly. Inside the dormitory corridor, the air feels heavier. Stone absorbs sound and warmth alike. The rules specify silence during certain hours, especially at night. This silence amplifies physical sensations. When you lie down later, you will hear your own breath more clearly. You will feel the slow seep of heat from your back into whatever surface you rest on. Sleep becomes a physical negotiation. Another established historical detail is that monks were discouraged from sleeping too deeply. Oversleeping was seen as a moral failing. Cold helped prevent that. It kept the body alert, ready to rise for night prayers. This was not accidental. The environment supported the schedule. Warmth might have encouraged lingering in bed. Cold encouraged discipline. You consider this as you pass a small window slit, barely wide enough to admit light. It lets in cold air freely. No glass. No shutters thick enough to stop winter entirely. The rules rarely mention insulating windows, because the architecture already assumed exposure. Comfort was never the goal. There is debate among scholars about how strictly these rules were followed in practice. Some monasteries were stricter than others. Wealthier houses may have bent rules quietly, adding tapestries or thicker bedding. Poorer communities had no such options. The ideal described in texts often collided with reality, and the result varied from place to place. You imagine lying down later, fully clothed, your breath fogging slightly in the darkness. The rules allow this. They expect it. Sleep is treated as a necessary pause, not an escape. Even the posture of rest is shaped by discipline. You are not meant to sprawl. You are meant to rest efficiently. A faint smell of smoke drifts through the corridor, likely from a kitchen fire banked for the night. It does not warm the space, but it reminds you that fire exists somewhere nearby. Carefully controlled. This distance is intentional. Fire brings warmth, but also risk. Cold is safer, quieter, easier to manage. You begin to understand that the rules are not there to make life harder for the sake of hardship. They are there to create predictability. When you know exactly how cold it will be, how long you will sleep, and when you will rise, the mind relaxes in a strange way. There are no decisions left to make. This predictability extends into the night. You will not wake wondering if something has gone wrong. Cold is not a sign of failure here. It is a constant. Accepting that changes how you experience it. The rules do not promise comfort, but they promise structure. As you prepare to move toward your cell, you feel the cold settle more deeply into your joints. It is not painful, just present. You are beginning to live inside the monastery's logic. Comfort is secondary. Order comes first. Sleep will follow that order, shaped by stone, cloth, silence, and the quiet agreement that this is how things are done. The cell waits ahead, but before you step inside, you carry this understanding with you. The cold is not an enemy to be defeated. It is a condition to be lived with. Under rules that have shaped generations of bodies and minds, you step into the cell, and the space answers you immediately with its simplicity. The door closes softly behind you, not sealing warmth inside, just muting sound. The room is narrow, barely wide enough to stretch your arms fully without brushing stone. The ceiling is low, the walls are thick. Everything here feels deliberate, measured, reduced to what is strictly necessary. This is where sleep happens, not comfort. A single, narrow window sits high in the wall. It lets in moonlight, pale and sharp, and a slow leak of cold air that never fully stops. There is no glass in the early centuries. And even later, glass is thin and imperfect. The window exists to mark time, not to protect you. One widely accepted historical fact is that early monastic cells were designed for solitude and focus, not physical ease. Privacy mattered more than warmth. You move carefully across the stone floor. It is colder than the corridor, if that is even possible. Stone that never sees sunlight develops its own kind of chill, deep and persistent. Your feet register it instantly. This is why sandals stayed on for as long as possible, even indoors. Bare skin against stone is a shock that steals heat fast. The furnishings are minimal. A low bed frame, or sometimes just a raised platform. A straw mattress, or sack, flattened by use. A thin blanket, often wool, sometimes patched. Never plush. A small wooden stool, perhaps a shelf with a few personal items. A book, a candle stub. That is all. This is not symbolic poverty. It is practical limitation. You sit on the edge of the bed and feel the straw shift beneath you. It crackles faintly, dry and scratchy. Straw mattresses were common across medieval society. Not just in monasteries. They provided insulation from the ground and allowed air circulation, which helped reduce dampness. What they did not provide was softness. Historians still argue whether monks replaced straw more frequently than peasants, or simply endured its gradual decay longer. As you lean forward, your breath fogs faintly in front of you. The air inside the cell is still, but not warm. There is no fire here. Fires are communal, controlled, kept away from sleeping quarters. The idea of a private hearth would have been unthinkable in most monasteries. Fire belonged to kitchens, infirmaries, and occasionally warming rooms, not to individual comfort. You notice the smell now. Straw, wool, old wood, and stone. There is a faint animal note, not unpleasant, just present. This place has absorbed centuries of human bodies breathing, sweating, praying, sleeping. The walls have listened to it all. Sound behaves differently here. When you shift your weight, the noise feels louder than it should, then disappears. A quirky detail recorded in some monastic inventories is the presence of simple foot warmers. Not fires, but small enclosed containers filled with warm material, sometimes heated stones. These were rare and often reserved for the sick or elderly. Most monks never saw one. Warmth was rationed carefully, both materially and morally. You lie back slowly. The bed frame creaks softly, a familiar sound that would have been shared across generations. Your shoulders tense as the cold surface draws heat from your body. You adjust, pulling your cloak tighter around you. Sleeping fully clothed feels strange at first, but it makes sense immediately. Every layer matters. Your head rests on a bundled cloth or straw pillow. It is firm, almost unyielding. Comfort here is not about sinking in. It is about holding position. You find yourself lying still, conserving warmth by minimizing movement. This instinct feels ancient, deeply physical. The cell teaches it quickly. There is an open scholarly debate about how individual monks experience these spaces emotionally. Some writings suggest peace, even relief, in the simplicity, Others hint at loneliness and discomfort that never fully faded. The truth likely varied. Bodies react differently to cold. Minds do too. As you stare up at the dark ceiling, you hear faint sounds filtering through stone, wind brushing the outer walls, a distant cough, the soft rustle of someone else turning over in their cell. These noises remind you that you are not alone. Even in solitude, the monastery breathes collectively. Even at night, you feel the cold settling into your joints, especially knees and elbows. It is not sharp, just persistent. This is where posture matters. You draw your limbs inward slightly, reducing exposed surface area. Medieval monks did not have modern physiology textbooks, but they understood these principles instinctively. Generations of trial and error taught them how to lie in a way that preserved warmth. Your hands rest on your chest or tucked under your arms. Fingers grow stiff if left exposed. You learn quickly where to place them. Sleep becomes a slow choreography of small adjustments. Each movement costs heat. Each still moment preserves it. Another established fact, often overlooked, is that monks rarely slept alone for long periods of uninterrupted time. Night prayers interrupted sleep regularly. This made the cell less a place of deep rest and more a station between duties. Cold reinforced this rhythm. It discouraged sinking into heavy sleep that would make waking harder. You close your eyes briefly, then open them again. Darkness feels thicker here. Candlelight is used sparingly at night, both to save resources and to reduce fire risk. Your vision adapts slowly. Shapes soften. The cell becomes less defined, more abstract. Stone becomes presence rather than object. There is a faint sense of humility that comes with this space. The cell does not care about your comfort. It does not respond to complaint. This can be unsettling or calming, depending on how you meet it. Some monks wrote of learning to sleep lightly, like animals in winter, aware but resting. You think about how this contrasts with modern bedrooms, designed to soothe and insulate. Here, the environment keeps reminding you where you are. In winter, sleep is not escape. It is negotiation. As your breathing slows, you notice the rhythm of cold itself. It does not deepen endlessly. At some point, your body stabilizes. Heat loss slows. The cell reaches a balance with you. This moment, quiet and fragile, is when sleep begins to approach. Not deeply, not luxuriously, but enough. You settle into that balance, knowing the bell will break it later. For now, the stone cell holds you, not warmly, but steadily. The longer you remain inside these walls, the more the stone itself becomes a presence you must reckon with. You begin to understand that this choice of material was never accidental. Stone does not forgive mistakes. It does not soften with familiarity. It holds its temperature stubbornly, remembering winter long after the sun has done its brief work outside. As you lie awake, feeling the chill, press gently but insistently into your back, you start asking the same question generations have asked before you. Why build this way at all? From surviving plans and foundations, it is clear that monasteries favored stone for reasons that had little to do with warmth. Stone meant permanence. It resisted fire, decay, and attack. In an era when wooden structures could vanish overnight, stone promised continuity. A monastery was meant to outlast the men who lived inside it. Warmth was temporary. Stability mattered more. You feel this philosophy in your bones as the night deepens. The stone wall near your shoulder is cold in a way that feels ancient, as if it has never truly warmed. Even during summer, these buildings stayed cool. Winter simply pushed that quality to its extreme. This was known. Builders were not ignorant of the cold. They accepted it as the price of endurance. There is a common modern assumption that medieval people misunderstood insulation or lacked better options. In truth, wooden buildings existed everywhere. The choice to build monasteries in stone was deliberate. Wood burned too easily. Monasteries stored books, relics, and food. Fire was a constant threat. cold. While uncomfortable, was predictable. Stone minimized one danger by embracing another. You shift slightly, testing how close you can lie to the wall without losing too much heat. The answer is not very close. Even through layers of wool, the cold seeps in. Over time, monks learned this instinctively. Beds were often positioned away from exterior walls when possible. Small adjustments like this mattered more than any single blanket. One lesser-known detail appears in accounts of monastic construction repairs. Cracks in stone walls were taken seriously, not because they let in cold, but because they allowed dampness. Moisture was far more dangerous than low temperature. Wet cold could rot bedding, ruin manuscripts, and weaken bodies. Dry, cold, though harsh, was manageable. As you listen to the building around you, you notice how stone changes sound. Footsteps echo longer, coughs carry farther, even silence feels heavier. This acoustic quality reinforced monastic discipline. Noise traveled. Privacy was visual, not auditory. When you turn in your bed, the faint rustle of straw feels louder than it should, reminding you to stay still. There is disagreement among historians about whether the spiritual symbolism of stone influenced its widespread use, or whether practical concerns came first. Some argue that stone represented firmness of faith and withdrawal from the softness of the world. Others suggest that symbolism followed necessity, layered on later by writers looking for meaning in hardship. Both interpretations likely overlap. The cold also shaped how monks perceived time. Stone buildings cool slowly and warm slowly. There are no sudden changes. Night does not arrive abruptly. It seeps in. Morning does the same. This gradual rhythm aligns with the monastic schedule, where bells divide time evenly. Regardless of season, stone makes the passage of hours feel steady and unavoidable. You imagine the builders at work centuries earlier, quarrying blocks, hauling them into place, knowing full well how cold these walls would become. They were not building for comfort. They were building for centuries. The men who would sleep here were temporary guests. The stone was the constant. Another small but telling detail emerges from archaeological surveys. In some monasteries, later generations added wooden paneling or tapestries to interior walls, not to make rooms luxurious, but to reduce drafts. These additions appear unevenly, suggesting quiet adaptation rather than official reform. Not everyone accepted the cold in the same way. As you lie still, you feel how the stone draws your attention inward. There is no flickering firelight to watch, no soft surfaces inviting rest. The environment does not entertain you. This absence was intentional. Distraction was seen as a threat to contemplation. Cold sharpened awareness. It kept the body present, alert to itself. You breathe slowly, noticing how the air feels different near the wall than near the center of the room. Even small distances matter. Medieval monks learned to read these microclimates instinctively. They knew where frost formed first, where condensation gathered, where breath lingered. This knowledge was passed down without manuals, taught by living inside stone year after year. Some records hint that newcomers struggled most during their first winters. Bodies accustomed to warmer dwellings needed time to adapt. Sleep came lightly at first. Over time, tolerance grew. Whether this was physical conditioning or mental acceptance remains unclear, and interpretations differ depending on the source. The stone also carried meaning beyond function. Churches and monasteries were meant to mirror eternity. Stone outlasts flesh. Sleeping against it each night was a reminder of impermanence. Your warmth fades into the wall. The wall remains unchanged. This contrast was not lost on those who lived here. You notice how your own breathing has slowed, steady and shallow, conserving warmth. The cell feels no warmer, but your body has adjusted. This adaptation is subtle, almost invisible. It is how people survived in spaces that offered little mercy. Outside, wind moves across the monastery walls, but you barely hear it now. Stone absorbs and deflects, Inside, the air remains still. This stability is the gift stone offers. Not warmth, but shelter. Snow will not bury you. Rain will not soak you. Predators and intruders remain outside. The cold is the price paid for that safety. As sleep approaches, you realize that stone is not the enemy here. It is the framework within which everything else operates. Clothing, posture, routine, prayer. All of it exists in response to these walls. You are learning, slowly, how to exist inside them. Tomorrow, the cold will feel the same. Stone does not change its mind overnight. And knowing that, oddly enough, makes rest possible. When you wake briefly in the night, it is not because of noise. It is because the cold has shifted, not grown sharper, just different. Your body notices immediately, the way it always does here. You do not reach for blankets first. You adjust clothing. That is the instinct this place teaches. In the monastery, clothing is not decoration or self-expression. It is architecture you wear. Wool layers replace walls. Fabric becomes shelter. From what remains in inventories and rule books, it is clear that monks were issued garments with winter survival in mind. Tunics, scapulars, cloaks, hoods. Each piece served a purpose. And none were optional once the temperature dropped. Wool dominates everything. It smells faintly of lanolin and smoke, even after years of use. This is not accidental. Wool traps air, retains warmth when damp, and breathes just enough to prevent sweat from becoming dangerous. Linen appears underneath, but never alone. Linen against skin feels cool and smooth, helping manage moisture. Over it, wool builds the barrier. You shift your shoulders, feeling the weight of fabric settle around you. It is heavy compared to modern sleepwear, but that weight is reassuring. It presses warmth inward. The cloak you keep wrapped around yourself at night is not meant to look dignified. It is meant to slow heat loss. Some cloaks were so thick they could stand upright when placed on the floor. There is a small detail hidden in monastic regulations that often surprises people. In colder months, monks were explicitly permitted to wear extra layers. Even while sleeping, this flexibility mattered. Rules were strict, but not suicidal. Survival came first, even if it was framed quietly as discipline. You tuck the edge of your cloak under your arm, sealing off a draft you barely noticed before. Movements like this happen without thought. Generations of bodies learned them long before language tried to explain why they worked. This knowledge was practical, embodied, and rarely written down. Some monastic communities allowed fur linings in winter garments, though this varied widely. Fur was warm, but it also raised questions about luxury. Using it required justification. Often it was reserved for the elderly or infirm. Younger monks watched and waited, knowing their time would come eventually. If they lasted long enough, there is disagreement among historians about how uniform monastic clothing truly was across regions. Illustrations suggest variation. Textiles available in Scandinavia differed from those in southern Italy. Climate-shaped cloth, thickness, weave, and layering changed subtly depending on where you slept. What remained constant was the principle. You wore your warmth. As you lie still, you become aware of how your breath warms the air trapped near your face. Hoods mattered here. Pulling fabric over your head reduced heat loss dramatically. Many monks slept with their hoods up, faces partially covered, breath cycling warmth back into the cloth. It looks austere in art. In reality, it was sensible. A curious detail appears in some records of winter illness. Frostbite was rare inside monasteries. Despite the cold, hypothermia was also uncommon. This suggests that clothing systems worked better than modern assumptions allow. Stone cells were cold, but bodies wrapped in wool were resilient. You feel the roughness of the fabric against your neck. It scratches slightly, but you stop noticing after a while. Comfort adjusts its definition. What matters is that the cold stays at the surface, not in your core. Clothing creates that boundary. There is also a social dimension to these garments. Everyone wears roughly the same thing. There is no competition for better coats or softer cloth. This removes a layer of anxiety. You are not colder because someone else is warmer. The system spreads discomfort evenly, which strangely makes it easier to accept. Some monks reportedly slept sitting upright during extreme cold, wrapped tightly in cloaks. This posture reduced surface area exposed to stone and kept vital organs warmer. Whether this was common or exceptional remains unclear, but it speaks to creativity under constraint. Sleep adapted to conditions, not the other way around. You notice how the fabric smells more strongly now that you are warmer beneath it. Wool carries memory, smoke from kitchens, damp from rain, the faint human scent of countless nights. This smell becomes part of the sleeping environment, as familiar as the cold itself. As hours pass, your body finds a steady state. Heat loss slows. Shivering never fully begins. This balance is delicate, maintained by layers, into-do posture, and stillness. Remove one piece, shift too often, and it breaks. Clothing also shaped how monks experienced waking. Rising from bed meant exposure. Layers had to be adjusted quickly to avoid sudden chill. This encouraged efficiency. You learn to dress and move without hesitation. Sleep never leaves you naked and vulnerable. You are always partly prepared. There is an ongoing discussion among scholars about whether monks slept in their day clothes or changed into specific night garments. Evidence suggests overlap. Practicality 1. Changing clothes meant exposing skin. In winter, that was unnecessary risk. As you drift closer to sleep again, the fabric around you becomes less noticeable. Warmth stabilizes. The cold remains present, but held at bay. You understand now that the monastery did not rely on walls to keep monks alive at night. It relied on cloth, routine, and bodies trained to listen to themselves. Tomorrow, you will put these same layers on again. They will feel stiff at first, then soften with warmth. Clothing here is not comfort. It is continuity. Night after night, winter after winter, it carries you through. When you finally settle into the bed itself, you understand immediately that softness is not part of the design. The surface beneath you resists your weight. It does not cradle. It holds. This bed exists to lift you off the stone and nothing more. In winter, that small separation matters more than comfort ever could. The structure beneath the straw varies from place to place. Sometimes it is a simple wooden frame. In other cells, it is a rope lattice stretched tight, creating a firm web that barely gives. Over it lies the straw mattress, compressed and uneven. You feel the individual stalks through the fabric. They shift as you move, then settle again, forming shallow hollows shaped by countless bodies before yours. Beds like this were common across medieval Europe, not just in monasteries. What differs here is intention. In monastic life, the lack of softness was not corrected because it served a purpose. Deep sleep was not the goal. Rest was meant to be light, reversible, ready to break at the sound of a bell. You lie back and feel the cold rising slowly from below. Straw insulates better than bare boards. But it is not magic. Over time, heat drains downward. You learn quickly not to lie flat for too long. Slight adjustments help. A knee bent, a shoulder angled. The bed teaches you how to use it. There is an old assumption that monks slept poorly because of these beds. That is only partly true. Sleep was fragmented. Yes, but not necessarily miserable. The body adapts. What feels intolerable on the first night becomes familiar within weeks. Hardness fades into the background. Cold becomes a constant hum, rather than a sharp signal. Some early monastic writings hint that deliberately uncomfortable beds were meant to keep the body humble. But there is another layer beneath that idea. Soft bedding traps moisture. Moisture invites mold, insects, and illness. Firm beds with breathable straw reduced those risks. What looked like austerity also served hygiene. You reach down and feel the edge of the mattress. The straw is dry tonight. That matters. Damp bedding was dangerous in winter. Monasteries worked hard to keep sleeping materials dry, rotating straw when possible, airing bedding during daylight. This maintenance rarely appears in dramatic accounts, but it shaped survival. A lesser-known detail emerges from estate records attached to some monasteries. Straw was sometimes sourced from specific fields known for producing thicker stalks. Thin straw broke down too quickly and offered less insulation. Choices like this reveal how practical knowledge accumulated quietly over time. As you lie still, the firmness keeps your spine aligned whether you want it or not. There is no sinking into awkward positions. This reduces tossing and turning. Movement wastes heat. Stillness preserves it. The bed encourages stillness by refusing to accommodate restless habits. There is debate among historians about whether discomfort itself was spiritually emphasized or simply tolerated. Some texts praise hard beds as tools for discipline. Others barely mention them, suggesting they were so normal they needed no comment. Silence in the sources can mean acceptance rather than approval. Your head rests on a narrow pillow stuffed with cloth or straw. It is barely raised. Neck support comes from posture rather than cushioning. You adjust once, then stop. Too much movement invites cold back into the layers you worked so carefully to trap. You notice how sound behaves differently when you are lying down. The bed creaks faintly when you breathe deeply. The straw rustles if you shift your weight. These sounds feel amplified in the quiet cell. They remind you to move slowly, deliberately. Some monks reportedly slept without mattresses at all during certain periods, lying directly on boards with a blanket beneath them. Whether this was common practice or occasional penance is unclear. What is clear is that straw, when available, was preferred. Even discipline had limits. The bed also shapes how you wake. Rising from it is abrupt. There is no lingering warmth held by foam or feathers. The moment you move, the cold returns. This discourages lingering. When the bell rings, you rise, because staying still no longer feels protective. You curl slightly on your side, drawing knees closer to your chest. This position reduces exposure and conserves warmth. It also feels instinctive, almost animal. Medieval sleepers likely favored it in winter, though illustrations rarely show such realities. There is a practical reason beds were narrow. Less surface area means less heat lost. A wide bed would have been harder to warm with a single body. Narrowness forced efficiency. You fill the space you are given. Nothing more. As time passes, the firmness fades from conscious awareness. Your muscles relax into the limits of the bed rather than fighting them. This acceptance marks the threshold of sleep. Not the deep, luxurious sleep you know from modern life, but a lighter state where awareness never fully disappears. You drift, then surface again briefly, sensing the bed beneath you, the straw holding shape, the wood unmoving. The cell remains cold, but stable. Nothing has changed. That consistency allows rest to continue. The bed does not promise dreams. It promises survival through the night. For centuries, that was enough. And as your breathing evens out once more, you realize that your body has accepted this bargain. You wake again. But this time it is not the cold that stirs you. It is sound, not a sudden noise, not anything alarming, just a shift in the quiet that your body has learned to recognize. In a place like this, silence is never empty. It is layered, textured, and alive in subtle ways. As you lie still, wrapped in wool and straw, you begin to hear the monastery at night. The wind comes first. It presses against the outer walls, not howling, just brushing, like a hand moving slowly across stone. The sound travels through narrow gaps and high windows, softened but persistent. Stone does not stop wind noise entirely. It reshapes it. What reaches you is not force, but presence. somewhere above or below. A wooden beam creaks as the temperature continues to drop. Wood contracts in cold, and the monastery responds with small adjustments of its own. These noises are familiar to the men who live here. They do not signal danger. They signal change. Night is settling deeper. You hear breathing, not just your own, but others, faint and distant. A cough echoes once, then fades. A throat clears. Someone shifts on straw. These sounds remind you that sleep here is shared. Even in solitude, walls divide space, not experience. Everyone listens to the same night. In many monastic communities, complete silence was expected after certain hours. Yet sound still travelled. This created an environment where monks became acutely aware of one another without speaking. Listening replaced conversation. Awareness replaced comfort. There is an odd reassurance in this. You are not isolated. You are held within a structure that breathes collectively. When one sound appears, it registers everywhere. The monastery becomes a single body at rest. The bells are the most powerful presence. Even when they are silent, you know they will ring again. That knowledge shapes how you sleep. You do not drift too far. Part of you stays alert, tuned to the possibility of sound. This lightness of sleep is not accidental. It is reinforced by cold, firmness, and routine. A curious detail emerges from accounts of monastic night watches. Some monks reported learning to distinguish every sound by location: a cough in the east wing, footsteps near the cloister, wind in the bell tower. The building became a map drawn in sound. As you lie there, the stone cell amplifies small noises. Your own breath sounds louder to you than it ever would at home. You hear the faint whistle of air as it passes through fabric near your mouth. You slow your breathing slightly, unconsciously conserving warmth and quiet at the same time. There is ongoing discussion among historians about how silence functioned psychologically in monasteries. Some suggest it deepened contemplation. Others argue it heightened anxiety, especially at night. The truth likely depended on the individual. For some, silence calmed. For others, it sharpened awareness of discomfort. The cold changes how sound feels. In winter air, noise travels differently. Crisper, clearer. A distant door closing sounds closer than it is. You hear it, then realize how far away it must be. The stone carries it without distortion. You turn your head slightly and hear straw shift beneath your ear. The sound feels intrusive, almost loud. You stop moving immediately. This teaches you stillness faster than any rule. The quieter you remain, the less you disturb both yourself and others. Outside, an animal moves near the outer wall. Perhaps a fox. Perhaps nothing more than branches scraping stone. You cannot see it, but you can hear it briefly. Then not at all. Nightlife continues beyond the monastery, indifferent to human routines. There is no clock in your cell. Time is measured by sound and bodily sensation. When cold deepens, hours have passed. When bells ring, time resets. Sound becomes the structure that replaces light. Some monasteries employed night guards or watchers, monks who remained awake to monitor the grounds. Their footsteps, slow and deliberate, were a familiar sound in the dark. Hearing them pass could be comforting, a reminder that vigilance did not sleep even when you did. You realize that sound also keeps you warm in a strange way. Listening keeps you present. It prevents your mind from drifting too deeply into dreams, where you might lose awareness of your body. In this environment, awareness is safety. As your breathing settles again, the sounds blend into a steady background. Wind, stone, distant movement. None of it demands action. You are safe. Cold, but safe. Sleep returns in fragments. You drift, then surface, always tethered by sound. This is not rest as escape. It is rest as suspension. You remain connected to the world even while lying still. Eventually, The sounds thin out. Wind eases. Movement quiets. The monastery enters its deepest stillness. A pause between bells. You lie within that pause, wrapped in cloth and silence, listening to nothing and everything at once. At some point in the night, you become aware of warmth without feeling warm. It is faint, indirect, almost imagined. This is as close as the monastery comes to offering heat while you sleep. Fire exists here, but it is kept at a distance, both physically and symbolically. You know it is there somewhere, banked low, watched carefully, never allowed to wander. The rules governing fire are strict for a reason. Entire religious communities had been lost to careless sparks. Roof beams dried by years of smoke could ignite in seconds. In places filled with parchment, wood, and straw, fire was a greater danger than cold ever was. The monks accepted freezing nights as the safer choice. Some monasteries did maintain a warming room, often called a calefactory. This space was not designed for sleeping. It was a place to briefly restore circulation, to thaw fingers stiff from work or prayer. You might have passed it earlier in the evening, a room where heat lingered just long enough to be noticed. But now, in the deep hours of night, it is closed, its fire reduced to embers. You lie in your cell knowing that fire is not meant for you right now. Its presence is communal, controlled, rationed. Warmth is shared sparingly, not privately indulged. This shapes how you think about comfort. You stop expecting it to arrive and focus instead on preserving what little you have. In some communities, small braziers were used during the coldest months, but rarely near sleeping quarters. When they were used, they were watched constantly. A brazier left unattended could mean disaster. The smell of smoke drifting into cells at night was often considered a warning sign rather than a comfort. There is evidence from surviving building layouts that kitchens and bakeries were placed deliberately far from dormitories. Heat belonged to work and nourishment, not rest. Sleep was meant to be cool, even uncomfortable, reinforcing discipline and readiness. You feel the faintest difference in temperature when you turn your face away from the door. Somewhere beyond the walls, fire still breathes slowly, but its warmth never reaches you directly. Instead, it becomes an idea rather than a sensation. Some monks reportedly warmed stones or bricks during the day and carried them wrapped in cloth to their cells at night. This practice appears sporadically in records and seems to have been tolerated rather than encouraged. It was a quiet workaround, not an official solution. How common it was remains uncertain, but it suggests that even within strict systems, small human adaptations slipped through. As you lie still, you imagine the glow of a hearth you are not allowed to see, firelight flickering on stone, sparks settling, someone carefully tending embers so they will last until morning. This distant activity supports the entire community, yet offers you nothing tangible. The discipline is collective. Fire also shapes the smell of the night. Smoke lingers faintly in the corridors, absorbed into walls and cloth. It does not warm you, but it reassures you that food will be prepared. Bread baked. Life continuing. Warmth exists. Just not here. You notice how the absence of fire changes your relationship with darkness. There is no dancing light to distract you, no shifting shadows. Darkness becomes stable, uniform. Your eyes adjust fully. The cell loses edges. Space feels smaller and larger at the same time. There has long been disagreement about whether monks truly believed cold improved spiritual focus, or whether this idea developed later as justification. Some writings praise the clarity that comes from physical restraint. Others remain silent on the subject, suggesting that cold was simply endured without commentary. What is clear is that fire was treated with caution, not reverence. You remember how earlier you passed rooms where warmth briefly touched your skin. That memory feels distant now, like a different life. The contrast sharpens your awareness of your own body. You draw your cloak tighter, not expecting help from anywhere else. Fire also determined nighttime safety. Without open flames, cells remained dark, reducing the risk of accidents. Moving through corridors at night was discouraged unless necessary. Stillness was safer than motion. Sleep, even light sleep, was part of that safety. You breathe slowly, imagining heat pooling inside you, held by wool and stillness. This is the warmth you control, not borrowed from flame, but generated and conserved. It feels earned in a quiet way. Some monasteries eventually softened these practices, introducing more heating as resources allowed. Others held to older customs long after alternatives existed. The reasons varied: tradition, poverty, belief, or simple habit. Change moved slowly through stone walls. As the night deepens, fire becomes irrelevant to your experience. It exists somewhere beyond you, serving the community, but not your individual comfort. You stop thinking about it entirely. Cold becomes the constant again, predictable and manageable. Sleep drifts closer, not because you are warm, but because nothing is changing. Fire will not appear. Cold will not worsen suddenly. The world is stable. In that stability, rest becomes possible. You let go of the idea of warmth as rescue. Here, it is absence that defines the night. And somehow, you adjust to that too. You begin to notice that the cold is no longer just a physical condition. It has become instructional. It teaches without speaking, correcting posture, regulating movement, shaping thought. In this place, cold is not treated as an obstacle to faith, but as part of its daily exercise. You feel this most clearly in the moments just before sleep fully claims you, when discomfort sharpens awareness rather than breaking it. The idea that physical hardship could strengthen spiritual discipline runs deep in monastic thinking. From early Christian traditions onward, restraint of the body was seen as a way to quiet distraction. Hunger, fatigue, and cold all played a role. The goal was not suffering for its own sake, but clarity. Cold stripped away excess sensation, leaving only what mattered. As you lie there, wrapped tightly, you understand how this works in practice. When the body is too comfortable, the mind wanders. It drifts toward indulgence, memory, fantasy. When the body is slightly challenged, attention stays closer to the present moment. You feel your breathing. You feel the position of your limbs. Thought slows. Many monastic texts speak of vigilance, a state of calm alertness that persists even during rest. Cold supports this state. It prevents collapse into heavy sleep. You remain reachable, ready to rise when called. The bell does not have to fight through layers of comfort to reach you. It meets a body already half awake. There are descriptions from medieval writers who praise this condition, describing nights when sleep came gently but never deeply, allowing prayer to flow naturally into rest and back again. Others were less enthusiastic, hinting at exhaustion and strain beneath formal language. These differing tones suggest that endurance of cold was not experienced uniformly. You notice how your thoughts behave differently now. They arrive, but do not linger. Memories surface briefly, then dissolve. The cold seems to simplify mental space. There is no room for elaborate inner narratives. Attention remains anchored to sensation. This effect was sometimes interpreted as spiritual progress. The body, no longer demanding constant gratification, became quieter. The mind followed. Whether this was a genuine transformation or simply the result of fatigue is open to interpretation. Accounts vary, and modern readers often disagree about how to read them. The cold also reinforced humility. You cannot dominate your environment here. You cannot make it warmer through will alone. This lack of control mirrors the spiritual ideal of surrender. You accept conditions as they are and adjust yourself instead. Over time, this adjustment becomes habitual. You think of how often modern life trains you to eliminate discomfort immediately. Heating, padding, insulation. Here, discomfort is not a problem to be solved, but a condition to be understood. That shift changes your relationship with your own body. Signals that once felt alarming now feel informative. Some monastic communities framed cold explicitly as a teacher. Enduring it patiently was thought to cultivate resilience and restraint. Others avoided such language, focusing instead on obedience and routine. Either way, cold shaped behavior quietly, without sermons. You feel it now in the way you resist moving. Each unnecessary shift wastes heat. Stillness becomes a discipline. The body learns economy. Movement is deliberate. Rest becomes intentional rather than passive. There are reports of monks who struggled deeply with winter, especially those who arrived later in life. Their bodies resisted adaptation. Infirmaries existed for this reason, offering warmer conditions when survival was at stake. This reminds you that the system was not entirely rigid. Compassion existed, even if it was framed carefully. The cold also shaped social equality. Everyone endured it together. There were no heated private chambers for the powerful. This shared condition reinforced communal identity. When hardship is evenly distributed, it binds rather than divides. You realize that cold nights also created a kind of honesty. Weakness could not be hidden easily. Shivering, illness, fatigue all became visible. The community had to respond. Endurance was admired, but collapse was not ignored. As you lie there, your body no longer fights the temperature. It has settled into cooperation. Breathing is slow. Muscles relax just enough. This balance feels earned. It is not comfort, but it is stability. The spiritual meaning attached to this state may not resonate with everyone, but the physical reality is undeniable. Cold changes how you inhabit your body. It sharpens edges. It clarifies boundaries. You drift closer to sleep again, not escaping the cold, but resting within it. The discipline continues even as consciousness fades. In this place, even rest participates in practice. At certain points in the night, the solitude of your cell loosens its grip. You sense movement beyond the walls. Not loud or hurried, just the quiet coordination of bodies sharing space. This is when the cold feels different. Not warmer exactly, but softened by proximity. Even without seeing anyone, you feel less alone in it. Monastic life balanced solitude with community carefully. While cells provided privacy, monks were never meant to exist entirely apart from one another. Shared spaces punctuated the day and night, and those moments mattered most during winter. Bodies gathered, heat accumulated, and cold retreated just enough to remind everyone that warmth was possible, if only briefly. You remember earlier in the evening standing among others during prayers. The room had felt less severe then, shoulders nearly touching, wool brushing wool, breath thickening the air. The temperature had not risen much, but the sensation had changed. Human presence alters space in ways stone never can. These gatherings were not designed for comfort. They were designed for order, but warmth was an inevitable side effect. When dozens of bodies occupy a single stone room, heat builds. Monks noticed this. Some likely welcomed it silently. Others tried not to dwell on it. Warmth, when it appeared, was not celebrated, but it was not rejected either. There are references in monastic regulations to sleeping arrangements during extreme cold. In some cases, communal dormitories were preferred over individual cells in winter. This was not about sociability. It was about survival. A room full of sleeping bodies retains heat far better than a scattering of isolated cells. You imagine lying among others. Straw mattresses arranged in rows, each body contributing a small amount of warmth to the shared air. Breathing synchronizes unconsciously. The room settles into a collective rhythm. Cold still exists, but it becomes more distant. Some orders resisted communal sleeping later on, emphasizing solitude as spiritually superior. Others retained shared dormitories for centuries. Climate often determined these choices. In harsher regions, practicality outweighed idealism. Survival set the limits of discipline. As you lie now in your own cell, you hear footsteps pass in the corridor. A night watch, perhaps, or a monk heading toward prayer. The sound reassures you. Movement means warmth exists somewhere else. It means bodies are awake. Heat is being generated. Life continues. There is a subtle psychological effect to knowing you are not the only one enduring the night. Cold becomes easier to tolerate when it is shared, even without physical closeness. Awareness of others spreads the burden. In some monasteries, older or weaker monks were allowed to sleep closer together during winter. This practice was framed as care rather than indulgence. Heat shared between bodies was safer than heat borrowed from fire. Human warmth did not burn buildings down. You think about how rarely modern life requires this kind of cooperation for basic survival. Heating systems isolate you. Everyone controls their own temperature. Here, warmth becomes communal responsibility. You keep yourself alive, but you also contribute to the warmth of others simply by existing among them. There are hints in monastic correspondence that some monks preferred winter gatherings more than summer ones. In cold months, community felt more tangible. Shared hardship created closeness without conversation. Silence remained, but presence deepened. You feel this now. Even alone, the memory of others nearby lingers. Your cell feels slightly less empty. Cold presses in, but not as aggressively. Perhaps your body has adjusted further. Perhaps the thought itself offers comfort. You recall earlier how sound carried through stone. Now, sound becomes a sign of shared endurance. A cough is not an annoyance. It is proof of life. A footstep is not interruption. It is reassurance. The cold continues to shape behavior. You remain still, preserving heat, but the sense of isolation has eased. You are part of a system that has survived many winters before this one. The routines, the architecture, the rules all evolved to support collective survival. As sleep approaches again, you carry that awareness with you. Warmth may be limited, but it is not absent. It circulates through the community. Unevenly, perhaps, but reliably. You are not expected to face the night entirely alone. Your breathing slows. The sounds of others fade into the background. The monastery settles again, each cell holding its occupant, each body contributing quietly to the shared endurance of winter. At some point, without quite deciding to, you change how you lie. The shift feels instinctive rather than planned, as if your body has been quietly testing options all night and finally settles on the one that works best. You draw your knees in closer. Your arms fold inward. Your spine curves slightly. In this position, the cold eases its grip just enough to allow rest to deepen. Sleeping here is not about finding a perfect posture. It is about finding a survivable one. Over centuries, monks learned this through repetition rather than instruction. No rule tells you how to curl your body against winter stone. The lesson comes from the cold itself. You notice how much smaller you have made yourself. Less skin exposed. Less surface pressed against the bed. Heat stays closer to your core. The straw beneath you compresses into a shallow cradle shaped by countless sleepers before you. This shape is not accidental. It is the accumulated memory of bodies learning the same lesson again and again. Side sleeping becomes natural in winter. Lying flat leaves too much of you open to heat loss. Curling inward protects the chest and abdomen. Even your breathing changes. It grows slower, shallower, conserving warmth. Each exhale lingers briefly inside the folds of your clothing before escaping. Some medieval medical writings hint at preferred sleeping postures during cold weather. Though not written specifically for monks, they reflect a shared understanding of the body. Keeping the vital organs warm mattered more than comfort. Posture was part of health. You feel how your hands instinctively seek warmth. One slips between your thighs. Another tucks under your arm. Fingers left exposed stiffen quickly. Hidden, they remain flexible. These small adjustments happen without thought. The body remembers what the mind does not have to explain. There are illustrations from the period that show sleepers lying stiffly on their backs, hands folded neatly. These images reflect ideals, not nightly reality. In truth, winter demanded compromise. Bodies curled and twisted in whatever way preserved heat. Discipline adapted to necessity. You become aware of how still you have become. Movement has slowed to almost nothing. This stillness is not forced. It emerges naturally once you find balance. Too much movement invites cold. Too little causes stiffness. You settle into the narrow range between. Sleep here is shallow but continuous. You drift, then surface briefly, then drift again. Each time you return, your posture remains the same. The body holds on to what works. Dreams, if they come, are brief and muted. Some monks reportedly used their cloaks almost like sleeping bags, wrapping them tightly around their bodies and securing the fabric beneath themselves. This trapped warm air and prevented drafts. It also limited movement, which further conserved heat. Whether this was officially encouraged or simply tolerated varies by community. You notice how your head tilts forward slightly, chin closer to chest. This protects the throat, one of the most vulnerable places for heat loss. Even your face learns to minimize exposure. Breathing through fabric warms incoming air. The sensation is subtle, but effective. There is discussion among historians about whether medieval sleepers understood these techniques consciously or learned them entirely through experience. Likely both. Practical knowledge often circulates without formal explanation. You watch others. You copy what works. Over time, it becomes instinct. Your knees press together. The warmth there feels faint but real. Bone against bone traps heat better than bone against air. These small details add up. Survival in cold environments depends on accumulation, not single solutions. The bed itself supports this posture. Its narrowness prevents sprawling. Its firmness discourages restless turning. The environment nudges you toward efficiency without instruction. You are not comfortable, but you are stable. You recall earlier how the cell felt vast and empty when you first entered it. Now, curled tightly, it feels smaller, more contained. Space contracts around you as your body contracts inward. This change is not just physical, it is mental. You occupy less, need less. Some monks wrote of learning to sleep like this even in warmer seasons. Out of habit, the body remembers winter long after it has passed. Curling becomes a default. Comfort redefines itself around endurance. You breathe slowly, feeling warmth gather at your center. The cold remains at the edges. It presses against fabric, straw, stone, but does not reach inside. This boundary is fragile, maintained only by posture and stillness. You protect it instinctively. There is no sense of indulgence in this moment. No softness. No release. Yet there is relief. The body has solved the problem well enough. That solution allows rest to continue. Outside, winter deepens. Inside, you remain curled. A small, efficient shape against the night. Sleep does not overwhelm you. It accompanies you quietly, as steady as your breathing. The night feels different when the body is no longer young. You sense this even without seeing anyone else. The cold settles into joints more slowly now, but it lingers longer. When you shift your weight, there is a dull resistance. A reminder that not every monk in this place experiences winter in the same way. Age changes how cold is carried. In many monastic communities, men entered at different stages of life. Some arrived as boys. Bodies still flexible. Circulation quick to respond. Others came later, already shaped by years of labor, illness, or travel. Winter did not treat them equally. Stone made no allowances for age. There are records that quietly acknowledge this difference. Infirmaries existed not only for disease, but for weakness brought on by cold. These spaces were warmer, better insulated, sometimes closer to kitchens. Entry into them was not considered failure. It was necessity. Survival mattered more than strict uniformity. You imagine an older monk lying awake nearby, joints aching as the temperature drops. His posture must be adjusted more carefully. Curling too tightly strains muscles. Lying flat stiffens the back. Every position carries trade-offs. Sleep becomes negotiation rather than rest. Younger bodies adapt faster. Blood moves easily. Shivering generates warmth quickly. Older bodies conserve differently. Stillness matters more. Layers must be arranged precisely. A small draught that a younger monk might ignore becomes painful over hours. Some monastic rules allowed exceptions for age without making a spectacle of it. Extra clothing, slightly thicker bedding, closer proximity to shared warmth. These allowances were framed as care, not indulgence. Respect for elders translated into practical adaptation. You feel grateful now for the posture your body has found. It works for you, but you realize it might not work forever. Cold teaches humility by reminding you that strength is temporary. Medical knowledge at the time linked cold with imbalance. Older bodies were thought to be drier, less able to generate internal heat. Whether or not these theories were accurate, they shaped treatment. Warmth was medicine, not comfort, when applied to the aged. You think of how age also changes sleep itself. Lighter, more fragmented, more sensitive to discomfort. In winter, this effect intensifies. The bell that wakes everyone may find some already awake, waiting, half listening for hours. There are glimpses in monastic letters of concern for older brothers during harsh winters, requests for extra fuel, mentions of illness spreading more easily when cold persisted. These hints remind you that the system, while disciplined, was not blind. You lie still, listening to your own breath, imagining the varied experiences unfolding behind other doors, some sleeping deeply, some barely resting. The monastery holds all of them, equally cold, unequally felt. Cold also accelerates decline. Stiffness leads to less movement. Less movement weakens circulation. This cycle was understood intuitively, if not scientifically, encouraging older monks to move, even briefly, mattered. Night prayers were difficult, but they kept bodies from freezing into stillness. You picture an elderly monk rising slowly from his bed when the bell rings, joints protesting, breath shallow. The cold cell offers no sympathy, yet routine provides support. He knows where to place his feet. He knows how to wrap his cloak. Muscle memory carries him through what strength no longer can. There is something quietly dignified in this endurance. Not heroic, not dramatic, just persistent. Winter does not single him out. It applies evenly. How each body responds reveals its history. You feel the contrast in your own limbs. Perhaps you are younger. Perhaps you are simply not yet worn down. Cold still challenges you, but it does not defeat you. You recognize that this will not always be the case. Some monks likely feared winter more as they aged. The cold did not grow harsher, but their ability to meet it changed. This awareness may have deepened their dependence on community. Help with tasks, shared warmth during gatherings, quiet watchfulness. You notice how your breathing has slowed again. Sleep edges closer. The thought of age lingers, but does not disturb you. It feels like part of the story rather than a threat. In this place, age is not hidden. It is visible in movement, in posture, in how long it takes to rise from bed. Cold exposes these differences without judgment. It simply exists. You allow your muscles to relax further, trusting the balance you have found. For tonight, your body holds its heat. For tonight, rest continues. The monastery does not promise ease, but it offers continuity. Winter after winter, bodies change, routines adapt, and the night passes all the same. You drift again, aware that cold teaches everyone differently, but teaches everyone something. The bell does not crash into the night. It enters it. A single clear tone rises, spreads through stone, and settles into your body before your mind fully understands what it means. You open your eyes without surprise. Part of you has been waiting for this sound for hours. Night prayers come when the cold is deepest. This timing is deliberate. Rising now tests discipline more than any daylight ritual. Your limbs resist at first. Stiff from stillness and chilled air, you sit up slowly, letting blood return to places that have gone quiet. The cell feels colder when you move. Stillness had been working in your favor. You swing your feet down and feel the stone through the soles of your sandals. The shock is brief but sharp enough to wake you fully. This moment repeats night after night. Winter after winter. The body learns to expect it. Anticipation dulls the edge. You wrap your cloak tighter, securing it with practiced movements. There is no fumbling. Darkness encourages efficiency. You know exactly where everything is. The cold leaves little room for hesitation. As you step into the corridor, other doors open softly. Figures emerge. Shapes layered in wool. Heads lowered. Movements quiet. No one speaks. Speech would cost warmth and break focus. Silence preserves both. Walking generates heat, and you feel it almost immediately. Muscles warm as they work. Breath deepens. Circulation improves. This is one reason night prayers matter physically as well as spiritually. They prevent the body from slipping too far into cold inertia. The corridor carries sound differently now. Footsteps echo faintly, then disappear. The building seems awake, alert, listening. The bell's vibration still lingers in the stone. A reminder that time here is regulated by sound rather than light. You enter the prayer space and take your place. Bodies stand close enough that sleeves brush. This proximity is not accidental. It limits heat loss. Even without touching, shared air warms slightly. The room feels less severe than the cell. Though still far from warm, you stand through the prayers. Knees lock, then unlock. Weight shifts subtly from foot to foot. These micro-movements keep blood flowing without breaking stillness. The cold remains present, but it loosens its grip. Chanting begins, low and steady. Breath warms the air. Voices rise and fall together. The sound fills the space, vibrating through chests and walls. It creates warmth of a different kind. Not thermal, but stabilizing. The rhythm carries you when muscles tire. There are accounts that describe night prayers as the most demanding part of winter monastic life. Standing still in cold stone rooms required endurance. Yet these same accounts often speak of clarity during these hours. Discomfort narrowed focus. There was nothing to distract from breath, sound, and presence. You feel this now. The cold keeps your mind anchored. There is no drifting, no softening. Attention stays with the moment. When thought wanders, sensation brings it back. Some monks likely resented this routine, especially in harsh winters. Others embraced it as the heart of their discipline. Sources vary in tone, suggesting a range of experiences rather than a single truth. What is certain is that the practice endured, refined by centuries of repetition. When prayers end, there is no lingering. Standing has generated warmth, but stillness will steal it again. You turn and walk back through the corridors with quiet urgency. The body understands that the window of warmth is closing. Returning to your cell feels different now. The space seems colder than before, not because it has changed, but because you have. Heat gained through movement dissipates quickly when you stop. You settle back onto the bed, arranging layers carefully, recapturing the balance you had before the bell. Lying down again takes longer. Muscles resist cooling. Shivering threatens briefly, then fades as posture and clothing do their work. Breath slows. The rhythm of the night reasserts itself. These interruptions fragment sleep, but they also structure it. You never sink too deeply. Rest comes in waves rather than a single long stretch. This pattern becomes normal. The body adapts, learning to recover in shorter intervals. Some observers later criticized this routine, arguing that broken sleep weakened monks over time. Others pointed out that many communities thrived for centuries under these conditions. The debate continues, shaped by modern assumptions about rest and health. You notice that after prayers, sleep returns more quickly. Movement has warmed you just enough. The cold feels less intrusive. This brief reprieve is part of the system. Cold and motion alternate, each balancing the other. As you drift again, the bell's echo fades completely. The monastery settles back into its listening posture. Outside, winter continues its quiet work. Inside, bodies rest where they can, supported by routine rather than comfort. You hold on to warmth a little longer this time. The cell feels less hostile. The night feels shorter. The rhythm is familiar now. Cold. Movement. Stillness. Rest. This cycle will repeat before morning. You no longer question it. The body accepts the pattern. Sleep comes not despite the interruption, but because of it. When you return to stillness after the night prayers, you notice something else sharing the space with you. It is subtle at first, almost easy to dismiss. A faint rustle, a tiny shift of weight somewhere near the wall. Life moves here, even when humans try to remain perfectly still. Animals, small and persistent, find their way into warm places. And in winter, warmth is a powerful invitation. You listen carefully. The sound is light, quick, then gone. A mouse, perhaps, navigating along the edge of the cell where crumbs and straw collect. These creatures are not intruders in the modern sense. They are residents, tolerated more than welcomed. Stone buildings offered shelter not only to monks, but to anything small enough to slip through cracks and gaps. Monasteries did what they could to manage vermin, but total exclusion was impossible. Grain stores attracted rodents. Straw bedding offered nesting material. Cold drove animals indoors just as surely as it drove people deeper into cloaks. Winter blurred the boundary between human and animal survival. You feel a strange mix of irritation and understanding. The mouse is not here to disturb you. It is here to live. Its body seeks warmth the same way yours does. This shared motive creates an uneasy truce. As long as it does not climb onto the bed, you remain still. There are accounts that mention monks waking to find small animals curled near them, drawn by body heat. Reactions varied. Some brushed them away. Others ignored them entirely. In extreme cold, a warm presence, even an unwelcome one, could feel less threatening than the surrounding chill. Cats appear in some monasteries, though not universally. Where they existed, they served a practical role, keeping rodent populations down. Their presence added another layer of warmth to the building, though rarely to individual cells. A cat might curl near a hearth, not beside a sleeping monk. Insects also persisted through winter, hiding in cracks, emerging briefly when temperatures shifted. Fleas were an unfortunate reality in many medieval sleeping spaces. Wool and straw created ideal habitats. Cold reduced their activity, but did not eliminate them entirely. This was another reason bedding was kept dry and aired whenever possible. You shift slightly, careful not to disturb the fragile balance you have achieved. Movement invites cold back in, but stillness risks attracting attention. You find a compromise, minimal adjustment, then stop. Animals also contributed indirectly to warmth. Livestock housed near monastic buildings generated heat simply by existing. In some rural monasteries, stables were built adjacent to dormitories. This arrangement was practical, not sentimental. Warmth traveled upward. Smells did too. Survival outweighed comfort. You catch a faint scent now, earthy and organic. It reminds you that this place is not sealed off from the natural world. The monastery stands apart, but it is not separate. Winter presses all living things toward shared shelter. There is discussion among historians about how monks perceived animals within sacred spaces. Some viewed them as nuisances. Others saw them as fellow creatures enduring the same hardships. Stories circulated of monks sharing breadcrumbs with birds during harsh winters. Small acts of compassion that blurred strict boundaries. You imagine the mouse pausing near your bed, whiskers twitching, sensing heat. It does not know rules or vows. It knows cold and warmth. In that sense, it understands this night as well as you do. The presence of animals adds another layer of sound to the night. Tiny movements, scratching, the occasional thump of something larger shifting elsewhere in the building. These sounds weave into the fabric of sleep, no more disruptive than wind or distant footsteps. You breathe slowly, keeping your warmth contained. The mouse moves on. The cell returns to quiet. You realize that this shared environment, uncomfortable as it may be, sustained many forms of life through winter. Stone walls gathered warmth from any source they could find. Some monasteries later attempted stricter separation between human and animal spaces. Others accepted the overlap as unavoidable. Practices varied by region and resources. Where food was scarce, tolerance grew. You let the thought of the small creature fade. The night deepens again. Cold remains steady. Your body holds its shape. Sleep approaches in fragments, threaded with awareness. In this place, you are not alone in enduring winter. You share the cold with stone, cloth, breath, and unseen life moving quietly nearby. That knowledge does not disturb you. It grounds you. Rest settles back in. Shallow but sufficient. The monastery continues its quiet work of sheltering all who seek refuge from the cold, regardless of size or vow. By now, you have begun to sense that winter here is not a single experience. It changes depending on where you are, not just within the monastery, but across the wider world beyond these walls. Even as you lie still in your cell, wrapped tightly and breathing slowly, you understand that monks elsewhere are sleeping through very different nights. In the north, winter presses harder and longer. Cold arrives earlier and leaves later. Stone buildings in places like Scandinavia or the highlands of Britain absorb months of low light and bitter wind. Monks there learn endurance early. Their cells are colder not just at night, but during the day as well. Snow piles against outer walls and stays. Moisture freezes into cracks. The body learns patience as much as posture. Further south, the cold behaves differently. In parts of Italy or southern France, winters are shorter, but the buildings can feel deceptively cold. Thin stone walls designed for summer shade trap chill when temperatures drop. Damp air seeps in from the ground. The cold feels sharper, more penetrating, even if it does not last as long. You imagine a monk in a Mediterranean monastery lying awake, surprised by how cold the night feels despite mild days. His clothing is lighter, his bedding thinner. The cold catches him off guard. Adaptation comes quickly or not at all. Climate shaped monastic architecture as much as belief did. In colder regions, walls grew thicker, windows shrank, roofs steepened to shed snow. In warmer climates, airflow mattered more. These choices affected sleep directly. A cell designed to release heat in summer becomes unforgiving in winter. Records from different regions hint at these contrasts. Northern monasteries mention fuel shortages and frozen water. Southern ones complain more about dampness and drafts. Both describe cold nights. But the character of that cold changes. You realize that what you are experiencing now sits somewhere in the middle. Not the worst winter imaginable, but far from gentle. Enough to demand attention. Enough to shape routine. Some communities adjusted their schedules seasonally. Longer nights meant longer periods in the cell. Short daylight hours limited opportunities to warm up through work. In the north, winter compressed life inward. In the south, it interrupted patterns rather than replacing them. You think about how geography quietly dictated spiritual practice. The same rule read in different climates produced different lived experiences. Discipline remained constant, but conditions shifted its texture. There is evidence that monks traveling between regions struggled with these differences. A brother accustomed to northern winters might find southern dampness unbearable. One used to mild climates might suffer deeply when transferred north. The body carries expectations shaped by place. You shift slightly, noticing how your cell feels dry tonight. This dryness helps. Cold without moisture is easier to manage. Damp cold creeps into bone and cloth alike. Many monasteries fought dampness relentlessly, improving drainage, raising floors, repairing leaks. Warmth mattered less than dryness. You picture distant monasteries at this same hour, some buried under snow, others surrounded by bare earth and frost, all holding bodies through the night in their own way. Despite these differences, common strategies appear everywhere. Layered clothing, firm bedding, controlled fire, shared routines. These methods traveled across borders, adapted but recognizable. Monastic networks exchanged not just prayers, but practical knowledge. You feel part of that network now, even centuries removed. Your posture echoes theirs. Your breathing matches theirs. The cold connects you across time and space. As sleep edges closer again, the thought of other winters elsewhere does not distract you. It steadies you. What you are enduring is not unique. It is part of a larger pattern shaped by stone, climate, and human persistence. Outside, the night remains still. Inside, your body holds its warmth carefully. The world beyond the monastery is vast and varied. But here, in this cell, winter behaves in a way you now understand. You settle back into stillness, knowing that dawn will come differently depending on where you are, but that the night always asks the same thing. Endure, adapt, rest where you can. By now, you have learned that survival here depends less on grand solutions and more on small, almost invisible choices. The monks did not fight winter with dramatic inventions. They negotiated with it quietly, using modest tools and habits that added up over time. These were not comforts so much as adjustments, subtle ways of tipping the balance back toward livability. You become aware of one such tool when you shift and feel something firm near your feet. It is a folded cloth bundle, tucked carefully beneath the blanket. Inside, you imagine a warmed stone or brick, heated earlier in the day near the kitchen fire. It no longer radiates heat, but it holds the memory of it, releasing warmth slowly into the surrounding straw and wool. Not every monastery allowed this practice, and not every monk used it. Where it appears in records, it is usually mentioned briefly, almost apologetically, as if acknowledging a compromise. Yet it speaks volumes. Even within strict systems, people found ways to ease the night without openly challenging rules. You adjust your feet slightly, careful not to disturb the fragile pocket of warmth. It is faint, but noticeable, just enough to keep toes from stiffening completely. In winter, that difference matters. Other tools were even simpler. Extra socks layered over one another, sleeves pulled down over hands, a hood drawn tighter around the face. None of these required permission. They were part of the accepted uniform, used more or less generously depending on conditions. You recall seeing narrow benches along corridors earlier, placed near walls where sunlight fell briefly during the day. These spots warmed slightly, and monks learned to use them well. Standing there for even a short time could restore circulation. Heat did not need to be intense to be effective. It just needed to exist. There are mentions in some monastic writings of using heated water, not for bathing, but for warmth. A vessel filled with warm liquid might be held against the body briefly, then returned to the kitchen. This practice was limited by fuel availability, but it appears often enough to suggest it was valued. You think about how these strategies rely on timing. Warmth borrowed during the day must be conserved at night. Clothing dried thoroughly before sunset. Bedding aired when possible. Every decision earlier in the day shaped the night ahead. The cold also taught monks how to use their own bodies more efficiently. Gentle movement before bed, stretching limbs to encourage blood flow, sitting rather than lying too early, allowing heat to build before surrendering to stillness. These habits were not written rules. They were learned through experience. Some monks reportedly rubbed their hands and feet together before sleep, not vigorously, but steadily, generating warmth without sweat. Sweating was dangerous in winter. Moisture cooled quickly. Everything here aimed at dry warmth. You notice how carefully you avoid overexertion. Even now, turning too much risks cooling yourself down. The lesson repeats. Small, deliberate actions work better than sudden effort. There is debate among modern historians about how widespread these practices were. Evidence appears unevenly, suggesting variation rather than uniform adoption. What one community tolerated, another discouraged. Yet the persistence of these small tools across time suggests they mattered. You find comfort in this quiet ingenuity. The monks were not passive victims of cold. They were active participants in managing it. Even within strict boundaries, survival did not require rebellion. It required attention. As you lie still, you feel how these small choices have added up. Your core remains warm enough. Your breath is steady. The night no longer feels threatening. It feels known. You drift again. Not deeply, but securely. The tools around you, simple as they are, have done their work. Winter remains outside, pressing against stone, but it does not reach you fully. For now, that is enough. Lying there in the quiet after all these small adjustments, you begin to feel a tension that has been present all night, even if you have not named it yet. It sits somewhere between your chest and your thoughts, a gentle pull in two directions at once. On one side, belief. On the other, the body. Faith asks for endurance. Flesh asks for relief. Winter brings this conversation into focus. You are not alone in this inner negotiation. Medieval monks wrote often about the challenge of aligning bodily limits with spiritual intention. Cold made that alignment impossible to ignore. When fingers stiffen and breath shortens, lofty ideals meet physical reality. The body speaks clearly. The question is how you answer it. Some teachings encouraged monks to welcome discomfort as a form of training. Cold sharpened awareness. It reminded you that the body was temporary, fragile, something to be guided rather than indulged. In this view, every cold night was a quiet lesson in detachment. Yet there are also passages where writers sound tired, not rebellious, just honest. They describe long winters that drained strength, made prayer harder, dulled concentration instead of refining it. These voices remind you that faith was lived by human bodies, not abstract ideals. You feel this tension now as you lie still. Part of you wants to shift, to seek a warmer position, to pull the cloak tighter. Another part resists, worried that too much adjustment edges toward comfort, and comfort toward laxity. The line is thin and often invisible. Monastic discipline did not demand denial of the body. It demanded mastery. Knowing when to endure and when to adapt was part of that mastery. This balance was learned slowly, through seasons, through mistakes, through nights like this one. You remember how infirmaries existed for those who could not endure. That fact alone tells you something important. The system acknowledged limits. Cold was a tool, not an absolute commandment. When endurance threatened survival, accommodation followed. Still, deciding when you had reached that limit was not simple. Pride and humility tangled together. Was asking for warmth an admission of weakness or an act of wisdom? Different monks answered differently. Communities responded differently. You feel grateful that tonight, your body has found a workable balance. You are cold, but not endangered, alert, but not exhausted. This middle ground allows both belief and flesh to coexist without conflict. Some thinkers later criticized medieval monasticism for confusing physical hardship with spiritual virtue. Others defended it, arguing that controlled discomfort cultivated resilience and focus. The debate continues, shaped by modern assumptions about comfort and well-being. As you breathe slowly, you consider how rarely modern life asks you to sit with this tension. Heating systems erase it. Convenience resolves it before thought begins. Here, nothing resolves itself. You must choose how to respond, moment by moment. The cold makes that choice unavoidable. It strips away distraction. It brings you back to the body again and again. In doing so, it forces honesty. You cannot pretend to be beyond physical need when stone presses against your bones. At the same time, the routine gives structure. You are not improvising alone. Generations have navigated this same tension within these walls. Their solutions shape your night now. Layered clothing, brief movement, communal warmth, quiet acceptance. You realize that faith here is not about ignoring the body. It is about listening to it without letting it rule. Cold teaches listening. It provides constant feedback. Too much stillness stiffens. Too much movement chills. Balance is everything. You drift briefly into sleep, then surface again, aware of your breath, your posture, the faint pressure of fabric. The conversation between belief and flesh continues even in these half-dreams. Outside, winter remains indifferent to this struggle. It does not care what you believe. It does not soften in response to prayer. This indifference sharpens the lesson. Meaning is created inside, not granted by the environment. As the night moves on, the tension eases slightly, not because it is resolved, but because you have accepted it. Faith and flesh do not need to agree completely. They need only to coexist. You let your shoulders relax a little more. The cold remains, but it no longer feels confrontational. It feels instructive. You rest within that instruction, allowing sleep to return in its careful, shallow way. As the night stretches on, you begin to sense how much of what you are experiencing has been confirmed not only by words, but by what remains in the ground. Long after prayers ended and voices faded, the stone itself kept its record. Even now, lying quietly, you feel surrounded by evidence shaped not by storytelling, but by use. Archaeologists who have studied monastic sites often speak of wear patterns rather than objects. Smooth depressions in stone floors where generations walked the same paths. Polished thresholds where hands brushed walls for balance in cold corridors. These traces tell you how bodies moved, where they lingered, where warmth was briefly found. You imagine future hands uncovering the outline of your cell, the placement of the bed, the distance from the wall, the thickness of stone. None of this was random. It reflects a life adapted to cold rather than shielded from it. Excavations frequently reveal the absence of hearths in sleeping quarters. This absence is as meaningful as any artifact. Where fire should be, there is nothing. No ash, no scorch marks, nor fluid. The silence of the earth confirms what you already feel in your bones. Heat was never meant to live here. Bedding materials rarely survive intact, but impressions remain. Compressed layers of straw, traces of plant fibers pressed into dirt floors. These faint signs suggest repeated use, not luxury. Straw was replaced when it collapsed completely, not when it grew uncomfortable. The goal was function, not ease. You picture archaeologists finding narrow bed frames, rope holes along wooden edges where lattice once stretched tight. These details speak of firmness, of restraint. They tell a story of sleep designed to be light, reversible, ready to break. Some sites reveal later modifications. Wooden paneling added to stone walls, raised floors built over damp ground. These changes suggest gradual adaptation rather than sudden reform. Cold was not embraced blindly. It was managed carefully, adjusted when survival demanded it. You feel that same pragmatism now. Your posture mirrors centuries of trial and error, curling inward, minimizing contact with stone, protecting extremities. The earth remembers this even if texts do not. Animal remains appear in unexpected places, bones of mice and birds tucked into corners, evidence of shared shelter. These finds confirm that winter drove all creatures inward. The monastery was not sealed. It was porous, alive, part of its environment. Archaeological layers also show where monks gathered. Larger rooms reveal soot stains from controlled fires. Walls darkened by centuries of breath and smoke. These spaces contrast sharply with the untouched stone of cells. Warmth belonged to community, not solitude. You lie there, aware that your experience aligns with these findings. The cold is consistent. The silence is deliberate. Nothing here feels accidental. There is debate among researchers about how representative surviving sites truly are. Some monasteries were rebuilt repeatedly. Others were abandoned and altered. The record is incomplete. Yet the patterns repeat often enough to form a clear picture. You think about how rarely physical evidence lies. Stories can exaggerate. Rules can idealize. Stone simply records use. Where feet walked. Where bodies slept. Where warmth was allowed and where it was denied. Your cell, though imagined now, fits within this pattern. Sparse. Cold. Functional. It would not surprise anyone digging here centuries later. As sleep approaches again, you feel comforted by this continuity. Your night is not unique. It is part of a long, quiet accumulation of lived experience pressed into stone and earth. You rest knowing that even when voices fall silent, the ground remembers. You are not the first to lie awake in this cold and think quietly about it. Long before your night here, others put words to the same sensations. Not loudly, not emotionally, but with restraint that mirrors the life they lived. Their voices reach you now through careful phrases, tucked into letters, rules, and reflections meant for daily use rather than dramatic effect. Some of these writings are practical. Notes about winter provisions, mentions of extra cloth issued during harsh seasons, quiet acknowledgements that the cold lingered longer than expected. These are not complaints. They are observations, the kind made by people who accept conditions but still notice them. Other passages are more reflective. A monk writes about waking before the bell because the cold would not let him sleep deeply. Another mentions fingers stiff during prayer, struggling to turn pages. These lines appear almost in passing, but they reveal the texture of nightly life more clearly than any formal rule. You imagine one of them sitting at a desk during daylight, hands slowly warming as he writes about the previous night. He does not dramatize it. There is no sense of self-pity. The cold is simply part of the setting, as expected as stone walls or early bells. There are moments where humor slips through, a brief remark about breath fogging so thickly during prayers that it distracted the eye, a dry note about ink freezing in the well. These small comments feel intimate. They remind you that endurance did not erase personality. Some texts frame cold as a test, others as a companion. One writer describes winter nights as sharpening the mind, forcing thoughts to move slowly and deliberately. Another suggests that extreme cold made prayer harder, not easier, dulling concentration rather than refining it. These differing perspectives sit side by side without resolution. You notice how rarely warmth is mentioned directly. When it appears, it is often in the context of illness or mercy. A sick brother allowed extra covering. A fire kept burning longer than usual. Warmth is noteworthy because it is exceptional. The tone of these writings is measured. There is no language of suffering as spectacle. Pain is not performed. It is managed quietly. This restraint makes the moments of vulnerability stand out more sharply. You think about how these words were read by others living the same life. They were not meant to shock. They were meant to resonate. A reader would recognize the cold being described because he felt it too. Some monks used metaphor carefully. Cold becomes a mirror for spiritual dryness. Stone walls echo inner stillness. Yet even here, the physical reality remains close. Metaphor does not replace sensation. It sits beside it. There are also silences in these records. Long winters pass without comment. Nights go unmentioned. This absence suggests normalization. When cold becomes constant, it fades into the background of writing. What is always present does not always need naming. You feel this yourself now. Earlier in the night, cold demanded attention. Now, it simply exists. Your body has adapted enough that thought can move past it without denial. The voices you imagine do not offer solutions. They do not promise relief. They share experience. That sharing, even across centuries, creates connection. You lie still, listening to your breath, aware that someone long ago described this same quiet moment with the same careful words. Their night passed. Yours will too. Sleep approaches again, carrying their voices with it, steady and unadorned. As the night continues its slow passage, your thoughts drift toward a question that has hovered quietly in the background all along. Was this endurance truly necessary? Or was it simply accepted because no one imagined another way? The cold invites this question because it never stops reminding you of its presence. It presses just hard enough to provoke reflection. Some later observers looked back on monastic winters and judged them harshly. They saw unnecessary suffering where others saw discipline. They asked why stone cells remained unheated when alternatives existed, why rules emphasized restraint even as bodies weakened. From a distance, it is easy to frame endurance as excess. Yet from inside the night, the picture feels more complicated. The cold is not random cruelty. It fits into a system shaped by belief, resource limits, and experience. Heating every cell would have required enormous fuel. Forests would thin, fires would multiply, risk would increase. In that context, cold was not chosen for its own sake. It was tolerated as part of a larger balance. You feel this balance now. The cold is uncomfortable, but it is stable. Nothing unexpected is happening. The night unfolds exactly as anticipated. This predictability carries its own kind of safety. Some reformers argued that too much hardship distracted from prayer rather than deepening it. They believed warmth could support focus instead of undermining it. In later centuries, some communities adjusted their practices, allowing more heat during winter nights. Others resisted, fearing that comfort would erode discipline. These disagreements reveal that monastic life was not static. It evolved through debate, experiment, and gradual change. Winter nights became one of the testing grounds for these ideas. You consider how easily necessity can turn into tradition. What begins as survival strategy can become moral expectation over time. Once a practice is framed as virtuous, questioning it feels like weakness rather than inquiry. At the same time, shared hardship builds identity. Enduring cold together created cohesion. Everyone knew what the night demanded. Everyone faced it equally. Removing that challenge might have altered the social fabric of the community in ways no one fully understood. You lie still, feeling the cold as both burden and binder. It challenges you individually, yet it also links you to others enduring the same conditions. This duality complicates simple judgments. Modern assumptions about comfort shape how these practices are evaluated. Today, warmth is seen as basic necessity. In the medieval context, it was conditional, negotiated, often scarce. The threshold for acceptable discomfort was simply different. You notice that your own response has changed over the night. Earlier, the cold felt intrusive. Now, it feels expected. This shift mirrors the broader historical debate. What seems harsh from the outside becomes normalized from within. Some monks no doubt suffered more than they needed to. Others may have found meaning in endurance. Both experiences can be true at once. Systems affect individuals differently. You think about how discipline works best when it aligns with purpose. When hardship feels arbitrary, resentment grows. When it feels connected to shared values, it becomes bearable. The cold here sits uncomfortably between those states. Depending on the night and the person, your body adjusts again, making a small correction to posture. This is not rebellion or submission. It is adaptation. The system allowed for that, even if it did not always articulate it. The question of necessity remains unresolved, and perhaps it always was. Winter nights did not come with footnotes explaining their purpose. They arrived, demanded response, and passed. As sleep edges closer again, you let the question rest without answer. The cold does not require justification to exist. Neither does your endurance. Both are simply part of the night. You breathe slowly, accepting the ambiguity. Comfort and discipline are not opposites here. They overlap in unexpected ways. Enough warmth to survive, enough cold to remain alert. The night continues. Indifferent to judgment, you remain within it, resting where you can, enduring what you must. As you lie there, waiting for sleep to return once more, your thoughts drift outward, beyond the monastery walls, toward other people enduring the same winter in very different spaces. The contrast comes easily now. You imagine the low roofs of peasant cottages, the smell of smoke thick in the air, the glow of a hearth that never fully goes out. Compared to that, your stone cell feels austere, almost deliberately so. Peasant homes were built for warmth first and permanence second. Timber, clay, and thatch trapped heat efficiently. Animals often shared the same structure, their bodies adding steady warmth through the night. The air was smoky, sometimes stifling, but rarely as cold as this. People slept close together, piled under blankets, drawing comfort from proximity. You picture a family curled around a fire, children pressed between adults, the room alive with breath and movement. The contrast is striking. Where your monastery isolates sleepers, peasant homes gather them. Where your cell rejects fire, theirs depends on it. Yet the warmth came at a cost. Smoke irritated lungs and eyes. Fires required constant attention. Entire villages burned when sparks escaped. Comfort was fragile, easily lost. Safety was never guaranteed. You consider how monks deliberately stepped away from this model. Their cold was cleaner, quieter, safer in some ways. No choking smoke, no open flames near bedding, no animals shifting in the dark. The trade-off was isolation and chill. Some monks came from peasant backgrounds and knew this difference intimately. Choosing monastic life meant choosing colder nights. This was understood. The sacrifice was not abstract. It was felt every winter. Others entered from wealthier households where servants kept fires burning and bedding soft. For them, the contrast was even sharper. Stone cells stripped away familiar comforts and replaced them with discipline and routine. You realize that neither environment offered perfect rest. Warm peasant homes were crowded, noisy, and unpredictable. Monastic cells were quiet, orderly, and cold. Each shaped sleep differently. Historical records suggest that peasants often slept deeply but irregularly, waking to tend fires or animals. Monks slept lightly but predictably, guided by bells rather than necessity. The quality of rest depended on context, not temperature alone. You shift slightly, thinking about how smoke darkened ceilings in peasant homes, preserving warmth but damaging lungs. Monasteries avoided this, valuing clean air even when it meant colder nights. Health trade-offs were constant in both worlds. You feel the clarity of air in your cell now. Cold, yes, but breathable. Each inhale feels sharp and clean. This is a small comfort, rarely acknowledged but significant. The choice between warmth and structure reflects deeper values. Peasant homes prioritized survival and family cohesion. Monastic life prioritized order, contemplation, and communal discipline. Sleep followed those priorities naturally. You lie still, recognizing that your cold night is not necessarily worse, just different. It serves a purpose within this life, just as warmth serves a purpose in another. The comparison softens your frustration. You are not deprived. You are participating in a different balance. Winter asks something from everyone. How it is answered depends on where you lie. Sleep returns gently, carrying these comparisons with it, leaving you calmer than before. Sleep does not settle into a single, unbroken stretch here. Instead, it arrives in pieces, drifting in and out like shallow waves that never quite pull you under. You are becoming familiar with this pattern now. The body rests without surrendering completely. Awareness dims, then returns. Again and again, without drama. You wake briefly and realize you have not moved. Your posture holds. The curl of your body remains intact. Arms tucked, knees drawn in. This consistency is not stiffness. It is efficiency. Movement costs warmth, and your body has learned to spend that resource carefully. Fragmented sleep was normal in this world, not a failure. People woke naturally during the night, even outside monasteries. Here, that tendency was shaped further by bells, cold, and discipline. Rest came in layers rather than blocks. You drift for a time, then surface again, aware of your breath and the faint pressure of fabric against skin. There is no disorientation. You know exactly where you are. The cell does not change. Darkness remains constant. This stability makes waking less jarring. Some monks likely counted these waking moments as prayer. Others simply accepted them as part of winter. The boundary between rest and wakefulness blurs. The night becomes a continuous experience rather than a break from life. You notice that your dreams, if they come at all, are muted. No long narratives, just brief images that dissolve quickly. The cold keeps the mind tethered to the body. Even imagination stays close to sensation. There is discussion among historians about how this kind of sleep affected long-term health. Some argue it weakened the body over time. Others note that many monks lived long lives, suggesting adaptation rather than harm. The evidence remains mixed. You adjust your breathing slightly. Slower now. Deeper. This change happens without thought. The body seeks balance. Even in half sleep, warmth gathers again at your center. Another brief waking follows. You sense the passage of time without knowing how much has passed. Hours feel different here, without clocks or light. Time stretches and compresses unpredictably. You listen. The monastery is quiet. No footsteps. No bells. Just the low hum of wind outside and the subtle sounds of the building responding to temperature. These sounds anchor you. You realize that waking no longer feels like interruption. It feels like part of the rest itself. The night is not divided into sleep and not sleep. It is one continuous state with varying depth. This pattern teaches patience. There is no point in resisting wakefulness. Fighting it wastes energy and warmth. Instead, you lie still and let the next wave come. You drift again, carried by familiarity rather than exhaustion. The cold remains steady, no longer demanding attention. It has become background. Another brief waking. This time, you notice a slight change in the air. Perhaps the night is nearing its end. Perhaps your body senses dawn before light appears. Subtle cues guide you. You hold on to stillness. Rest continues in fragments, each one sufficient on its own. By the time deeper sleep finally arrives, it does so quietly, without announcement. You slide into it almost without noticing, held by routine rather than comfort. There is a point in the night when you stop measuring endurance altogether, not because the cold has gone away, but because repetition has worn down resistance. What once felt demanding now feels familiar. The body no longer asks when this will end. It simply continues. You sense this shift quietly. Your muscles relax a little more. Your breathing settles into an even rhythm. that holds warmth without effort. The posture you found hours ago remains unchanged. Not out of tension, but because it has become natural. The night has taught you how to inhabit it. This is where habit reveals its power. Generations of monks passed through these same hours, learning the same lessons in the same way. No single winter mattered on its own. What mattered was continuity. Night followed night. Cold followed cold. The body adapted. Not through force, but through familiarity. You imagine a monk centuries before you, lying in this same position, listening to the same quiet. He did not think of himself as enduring something extraordinary. This was simply how nights worked here. Over time, the extraordinary became routine. Routine shapes resilience more effectively than resolve. You do not need to decide to be strong every night. You only need to repeat what works. The monastery relied on this truth. It did not ask for heroism. It asked for consistency. You feel this now in the way your body responds without conscious instruction. Hands remain tucked. Knees stay drawn in. Breath moves slowly. Each response has been rehearsed many times before, both by you and by those who came long before. Winter does not feel shorter because of this. It feels more predictable. Predictability reduces fear. When nothing unexpected happens, the mind relaxes, even in discomfort. There is evidence in monastic records that winter routines rarely changed across generations. The same prayers at the same hours. The same clothing issued each season. The same sleeping arrangements maintained year after year. Stability mattered more than innovation. You think about how modern life often seeks improvement constantly. New solutions, new comforts, new efficiencies. Here, improvement meant refinement, not replacement. Small adjustments layered over time, tested by use. You notice how little effort you are spending now to remain warm enough. Earlier in the night, you were actively managing posture and layers. Now, the body maintains balance on its own. This is adaptation in its quietest form. Sleep drifts in and out again, but even waking feels softer. There is no frustration in it, no sense of failure. This rhythm has become familiar too. You realize that this is how endurance truly works, not as a single act of will, but as a gradual recalibration of expectation. Cold stops feeling like an intrusion and starts feeling like part of the background. Some monks spent decades in these conditions. Winter after winter reshaped their bodies, their sleep, their sense of what was normal. By the time they reached old age, the cold was no longer something to overcome. It was something they understood intimately. You feel a trace of that understanding now. Not complete, not effortless, but emerging. The night feels less confrontational, more like a space you know how to inhabit. Outside, the temperature may still be dropping. Inside, nothing changes. This constancy allows rest to deepen slightly, not into luxury, but into acceptance. You hold this state for a while, neither fully asleep nor fully awake. Time passes without marking itself. The body rests because it has learned how. Eventually, sleep settles more firmly. Not deep, but steady. The night continues its slow movement toward dawn, and you move with it rather than against it. You begin to sense change before you can name it. Nothing dramatic happens. The cold does not suddenly retreat. The darkness does not lift all at once. Yet something in the night loosens its grip. The air feels slightly less rigid. The silence shifts. Dawn is not here yet, but it is approaching. This moment between night and morning carries its own character. It is quieter than the deepest hours of night, but also more expectant. The body, having endured hours of cold and stillness, becomes subtly alert again. You lie there, aware without tension, listening for what comes next. Over the centuries, this threshold became important to monastic life. Morning prayer marked not just a spiritual transition, but a physical one. Light meant movement. Movement meant warmth. The promise of that warmth, however small, changed how the final hours of night were experienced. You imagine earlier generations of monks reaching this same point, lying in their cells with the same awareness. The hardest part of the night was over. Whatever discomfort remained, it no longer felt endless. Even in winter, dawn arrived reliably. Historical evidence suggests that this anticipation mattered deeply. Schedules were anchored around sunrise, not clocks. The body learned to read subtle cues, a faint change in air pressure, a softening of cold, the distant stir of birds beyond stone walls. You feel these cues now. Your breathing deepens slightly. Muscles prepare for movement without rushing. The bell has not rung yet, but your body is already leaning toward waking. Cold still surrounds you, but it no longer feels like the dominant force. Time has taken its place. The night has a shape, and you have reached its edge. There were periods when reformers questioned whether such cold nights were still necessary. As resources grew and building techniques improved, some communities experimented with warmer cells or later rising times during winter. These changes came slowly, often unevenly, and not without resistance. You sense how tradition resists sudden shifts. What endured for centuries carried authority simply by lasting. To change it required confidence that the new way would not erode discipline or identity. Some monasteries softened their practices quietly. Thicker bedding, better insulation, slightly delayed prayers. Others held firm, viewing these changes as concessions that might weaken resolve. The result was a patchwork of experience across regions and centuries. You lie still, aware that your night reflects an older pattern rather than a later reform. The cold has shaped every hour, yet you also sense how close you are to movement, to shared space, to the faint warmth of communal activity. Your body prepares itself. Fingers flex slightly inside sleeves. Toes curl, then relax. Blood flow increases just enough to counter stiffness. These preparations are subtle, almost unconscious. You realize that the cold has not defeated you. It has taught you how to move through the night with it. That lesson carries forward into morning. When the bell finally rings, it will not feel like interruption. It will feel like continuation. The night will give way not to comfort, but to motion, sound, and shared purpose. You remain still for now, resting in the final quiet. Dawn approaches without urgency. Stone holds its chill. Wool holds your warmth. Time moves on. You wake before the bell this time. Not fully awake. Not yet moving. Just aware. The darkness in the cell has thinned slightly. Though the window shows no clear light yet, dawn announces itself quietly here. Not with colour, but with change. The cold feels different now. Still present. Still firm. But no longer deepening. It has reached its limit. You lie still for a moment, listening to your own breath and the faint sounds beyond the walls. Somewhere, far off, a bird stirs. The sound is fragile, almost imaginary, but it carries meaning. Morning exists, even if you cannot see it yet. When the bell rings, it feels gentle rather than commanding. You sit up slowly, letting the stiffness ease out of your limbs. The bed releases you without protest. Straw shifts softly. Your cloak slides into place around your shoulders with movements that now feel automatic. Everything you do has been practiced through the night. Your feet touch the floor, and the stone greets you with its familiar chill. It no longer shocks. It informs. You know how to respond. Sandals on. Weight balanced. Movement steady. As you step into the corridor, doors open along the passage. Just as they always have, figures emerge quietly. Shapes wrapped in wool. Faces calm. Expressions unreadable in the low light. No one speaks. There is no need. Everyone knows where to go. Walking warms you quickly now. Blood flows more freely. Breath deepens. The body recognizes the transition from endurance to activity. Cold recedes slightly with each step, not because the building has changed, but because you have. The prayer space feels different in the early morning, still cold, but alive with motion. Bodies standing close, sleeves brushing, breath warming the air just enough to notice. The chants begin, low and steady, and the sound fills the room like a held breath finally released. You stand among the others, feeling the night fall away behind you. Not erased, but completed. The hours in the cell have done their work. They did not break you. They shaped you. When prayers end, light has begun to creep into the world outside, pale and indirect. It slips through windows and settles on stone without warmth, but with promise. Day has arrived. You move again, toward work, toward routine, toward shared space. The cold does not disappear. It will linger all day in these walls, but it no longer defines the moment. Motion does. You realize, standing there, that you made it through the night. Not heroically, not dramatically, quietly, exactly as intended. The stone cells will be waiting again tonight. So will the cold. But now you know how to meet them. The monastery holds its rhythm. Night yields to day. Winter continues. Life goes on. And as your breathing settles into the pace of morning, the memory of the night begins to soften. No longer sharp, no longer demanding, just part of the flow that carried you here. Now the pace slows. You feel the weight of the night lifting from your body. Not all at once, but gradually. Muscles loosen, thoughts lengthen. The cold fades into background sensation. No longer urgent. You are safe now, held by routine and daylight. Imagine yourself stepping back from the stone walls, carrying only the quiet knowledge of how people once slept here, how they curled inward against winter, how they learned patience through repetition, how rest did not mean comfort, but balance. Let the images blur gently. The straw bed, the wool cloak, the sound of wind against stone. Let them drift. No longer sharp, no longer cold. Your own space feels warmer now, softer. The contrast settles around you like a blanket. There is nothing to endure anymore, only rest. Breath slows, shoulders drop. The night you traveled through becomes distant, like a remembered dream that no longer asks anything of you. You did not survive by force. You survived by listening, adjusting, accepting. That lesson remains, quiet and calm. So let your mind loosen its grip. Let the last echoes of stone and winter fade. Stay with the rhythm of your breathing. Stay with the comfort of now. Sleep can come easily. You have earned it. Sweet dreams.